It's pantomime season, but not as you know it. Here's the issue. Everyone knows that an army spy operating for years within the IRA was a man called Freddie Scappaticci. We know he was protected by his handlers while he murdered and abducted people, and we know he was described as the most important secret that army intelligence had. He was their golden egg, and they showered him with holidays, homes, and even planned a party in his honour.
In this episode, we're going to explain the trail of evidence that lets us be so confident that the agent was Freddie Scappaticci, and why the head of the police in Northern Ireland this week has said it is a pantomime. He said it's a farce, that the government is refusing to confirm that fact publicly.
This is The State of Us. Hello, Declan Harvey.
Hello, Tara Mills.
So the big story this week has been the Kenova report, all 166 pages of it, and it has cost £47 million and has taken almost a decade to complete.
Yeah, and right back at the beginning, its stated aim was to investigate whether an intelligence agent who was working within the IRA had been protected by officials despite the fact that agent was responsible for murders, and that agent was known as Stakeknife.
But something has changed in the reporting of the Stakeknife story. Whereas it used to be said Stakeknife is suspected to be Freddie Scappaticci, or alleged to be, or believed to be. Now on the BBC you will hear us say Stakeknife was Freddie Scappaticci. So how can we be so confident? We're going to try to explain the breadcrumbs that have been building for 2 decades that leave no room for any doubt.
And this is important because the government is still holding on to its neither confirm nor deny policy when it comes to spies. And their position, in light of all the evidence that we're going to set out, has been seen as, I suppose, increasingly absurd by many, including Northern Ireland's Chief Constable.
And also the families of his victims feel it's only right that Stakeknife is officially unmasked given his crimes. And those crimes have obviously been reported widely elsewhere. And that's not really the focus of our episode today.
There are 3 things that you should probably know if you're just beginning with this Stakeknife Scappaticci story. The first is that Freddie Scappaticci was head of the Provisional IRA's so-called Notting Squad. It was the internal unit charged with finding and punishing informers. The irony, of course, is clear to everyone. But Scappaticci's crimes during this time have been described in the Kenova report as grotesque.
He was recruited by the Army's intelligence wing, but we now know MI5 were closely involved in handling him. And in the view of the Kenova team, MI5 has tried to conceal that.
The one other thing that you should probably know is that as claims of his being Stakeknife were circulating in 2003, our colleague Chris Buckler turned up at his house in Belfast with a camera crew, and this is what happened.
Don't take any more photos of this house, I'm telling you now. Because if you do, I'll come out and I'll do you.
So let's get stuck in and explain how we know Stakeknife was Scappaticci and Scappaticci was Stakeknife.
Julian O'Neill, our crime and justice correspondent, is with us again. Hello, Julian O'Neill.
Hello there.
I'm glad you're here because I think this is important, what we're going to attempt to do, which is explain the footing of the narrative around Scappaticci and Stakeknife and why we're feeling confident. And it appears to me that the first ever mention of a double agent at all, known as Stakeknife, who was operating at the very highest levels within the Provisional IRA, that initial claim goes way back to 1999 in a number of articles by Liam Clark for the Sunday Times. But it wasn't for another 4 years that we first got mention of the name Freddie Scappaticci. So tell me about that. When did we first get that name being linked to Stakeknife?
It was really around 2003 where for the first time we publicly had Freddie Scappaticci's name attached to Agent Stakeknife. He was exposed in a tabloid newspaper one weekend, and following on from that, there were the strong denials from Scappaticci himself that he was Stakeknife. There was a press conference organised, And the Republican movement and Sinn Féin backed Scappaticci's denials. And it wasn't until the year later, 2004, that Scappaticci fled to England and really the balloon went up. Scappaticci had been recruited in the late 1970s and throughout the 1980s had a prominent position at the heart of the provisional IRA, and he was being run by military intelligence with a strong influence also, we now learn, of MI5.
So once he was publicly named, Julian, we know now from the report, from the Kenova report, that he began to get a lot of help about getting out of the country and essentially disappearing. And I suppose it's probably just worth also saying at this point that, you know, in the Troubles, you know, being an informer, we knew what happened to informers. It was a bullet to the head, a body dumped at the border. So this was really significant that his life would have been in a lot of danger to the general public sense of this.
Yeah, I mean, Scappaticci's denials really ran out of road. And this is because a recording surfaced in which Scappaticci had been recorded by journalists working on a programme called the Cook Report from years earlier, in which Scappaticci talked quite openly about senior Republican figures. And at that stage, coupled with him having been outed as Stakeknife, albeit he had denied it, he had no option but to get offside, and he was helped in his relocation by those who ran him. He adopted a new identity, purchased a house in, I think, the south of England at the time, and lived a quiet life, relatively unknown to his neighbours, and certainly with very minimal contact with his family.
And no evidence of a job. So the suggestion is that he was being given money to subsidise his life.
Correct. I mean, you know, what the Kenova report says is that it can't put a figure on how much Scappaticci would have earned from his career as a spy within the IRA. But we're talking about a very substantial sum of money over a period of time. There was assistance to buy a house. There would have been payments of tens of thousands of pounds. There was talk about a pension. So while we don't know the final figure, I think it's quite clear that he had a financial rewarding career as an agent. And indeed, if you go back to what Operation Kenova says about his original recruitment by the army in the late 70s, finances may well have been a motivation for that. And, you know, if you look at the Scappaticci story, throughout the 1980s, there was talk of lavish holidays. I mean, I recall reading that he went on a skiing holiday at a point in time when these things were virtually unheard of in working class neighbourhoods of Belfast. So, you know, there was always money. We now have a clear indication of where that was coming from. But equally, when you look at how he came to be recruited, it's also suggested that his motivation may have been financial, but equally, he may have become an agent because he was going to be prosecuted for what we believe to have been a financial crime. So there was always an association of money with Freddie Scappaticci, and that carried right throughout his life, where he had an affluent retirement in England.
And yet, even when he was in England, there were name changes, there were death threats that did come up. So there was a sense that people were after him, but also that he displayed a bit of cavalier behaviour at that time as well.
I mean, look, he doubtless went to the grave always looking over his shoulder. We know the consequences that the IRA meted out to informants, definitely during the Troubles, but I suppose if you look at the Dennis Donaldson case as well, which was post Good Friday Agreement, post ceasefires, it shows that, you know, Republicans executed informants even in peacetime. So
He was hiding in a cottage in
that's
County
right.
Donegal
That's
and
right.
was found and shot.
So you would imagine that Scappaticci, despite all his bravado, would have gone to the grave, look always with one eye over the shoulder.
I do think that's interesting, though, the point you raised about this comment about him being cavalier, that his handlers struggled, it seems from the report, to handle him. That
Yeah.
at one point he came back to Belfast,
Yeah.
didn't tell anybody that he was coming back, and I think they say that he was spotted by intelligence operatives here driving around Belfast. Who knew he'd come back?
Yeah, I mean, he was a man who basically who had his ego stoked right throughout his career as an agent. He was always meant to feel highly, highly valued, and he took on a sense of his own self-importance. And I suppose you got to remember he was leading a double life as an agent and as a member of the IRA. And as a member of the IRA and its internal security unit, he had status and standing within the Republican community. He was a man of small stature, but the pips he had in the shoulder as part of the IRA's internal security unit, the Notting Squad, made that he carried himself with a swagger.
And what were you saying earlier about his personality?
Yeah, because he wasn't liked. He wasn't, he was feared. I mean, anything that you read about his former colleagues, if you like, he was not. He wasn't popular.
It wasn't a natural charisma that he had.
Charisma.
It was
No,
fear.
and I suppose that's probably how he ended up in the Notting Squad.
Yeah,
In dishing out and meting out the punishment to people who had been doing what he was doing himself,
Correct. He had a central role at the heart of the IRA, would have been privy to high-grade intelligence, which he was passing on to the security forces. Now, the issue becomes, how many lives did he actually save? And how many lives were taken out in order to protect his status and identity as an agent? And we know that Kenova found that he probably cost more lives than he saved. And the central issue, I suppose, of Operation Kenova, or one of the central issues, is how he was allowed and able by the state to carry out these acts, sometimes against people who were accused of being informants who actually weren't, in order to protect his own identity and his role as a provider of intelligence.
He was the perfect spy then from the British Army's point of view. You wouldn't have wanted it because he had that high-grade intelligence. But at the same time then, it just seems from the Kenova report and from reports we've read over the years that those lines became blurred between his handlers and between Freddie Scappaticci, and those relationships clearly got too close because of all this stuff that was being offered to him and the stuff around, protecting him, taking him on holiday when the police were wanting to investigate him on murder charges, and the whole idea of a leaving do and all the rest of it.
On 2 occasions, the army gave him military credentials and used a military aircraft to fly him out of Northern Ireland on holiday. We have a special dedicated unit within British intelligence known as the Rat Hole, which ran Stakeknife, the agent. He had his own special telephone line. We also learned that when Scappaticci's agent career came to an end, there was discussion to give him a military farewell do. Now, Kenova says it's not clear whether that happened, but it shows you the value, rightly or wrongly, that the army in particular attached to Freddie Scappaticci, the agent Stakeknife. And I'm still trying to, and I think people are still trying to come to terms with what did he actually provide in return for the consequences of being allowed to murder. And I think it's something which people haven't quite, I know I'm grappling with it because we know the consequences of what he did and how he was able to do that, but we don't actually know the full value of what was provided in return, other than Kenova saying he cost more lives than he saved. Certainly this idea, which was perpetuated about Stakeknife at the beginning, that he saved hundreds of lives, does not stack up. So I think, we probably don't know at this moment in time what his true value as an agent was.
Yeah, that's interesting. And we may never know the answer to that. Let's return, though, to our timeline of breadcrumbs. Scappaticci is now living in and around the south of England. He's moving a bit, sometimes at the last minute. But in 2012, there is a former general of the army who is tricked into, in a phone call he thinks he's having with a journalist, revealing another key bit of supporting evidence that Scappaticci is Stakeknife.
Well, there was a disgruntled former army employee who concocted a ruse with a senior military figure, claiming that he was a television researcher wanting to look at the agent Stakeknife. And in this recording, which subsequently became public, the general divulged some information about Stakeknife and about Scappaticci, and this is where the phrase came from, that Stakeknife was the golden egg of British state intelligence within the IRA.
He dies in 2023. This part of me wants to say he dies, we're told, in 2023.
I was actually in the newsroom the day that someone called me. I think it was a colleague on Spotlight, and they said, "Have you heard Freddie Scappaticci's died?" And as I was taking the call, I got a text message to say Scappaticci has died. And the first question out of my mouth, of course, is, well, how do we know this? And I remember calling a contact at Operation Kenova. I couldn't get hold of him initially. The media was reporting this, and I was under huge pressure in the BBC newsroom to basically say, can we run it, and why are we not running it? And I was saying, look, guys, I just want to be sure here. But high level, confirmation came, and one of the first things that I said to my contact was, can you be sure? Or how has this come to light? And what I was told was, we're waiting to see the death certificate. We're asking all these questions as well. Let me just say this, that, Kenova accept that he is dead. I haven't heard any evidence or seen any concrete evidence to the contrary. But that's not to say that people like to perpetuate conspiracy theories. And, I recall saying to John Boucher once, well, where's the latest theory that Freddie's hiding out? And, he get an atlas out. Such are the conspiracy theories. But I think they have been firmly put to bed. I think the death certificate was produced. We've obviously got the issue around the will. So I don't think there's any question here. But of course, right at the outset, of course, we were going to be sceptical.
But in terms of linking Freddie Scappaticci and the Stakeknife identity, what happened around his death is also key, because there was a little bit of time delay between what eventually came out as his date of death, which was the 20th of March.
That's right, and I think
for 3 weeks.
And I think even when the media got confirmation that Scappaticci had died, he had already been buried. Yeah. So even I think even investigators in Kenova, so they tell me, didn't find out on the day he died. I think a lot of people found out after the fact. But yeah.
Then the Public Prosecution Service later that year announced that they're not going to take any decision on prosecution against their key named suspect because he had died. So there's the other link. Tell us about the will as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm not. I haven't really sought to analyse whatever is in the public domain around the will, other than, it is a peculiar set of circumstances, is it not? That the will is sealed, and I think John Boucher said at the press conference this week that this is something that only usually happens around royals. Such were the circumstances, and I think that simply adds to the mystery around the life and death of Freddie Scappaticci. Even in death, secrets are being sealed and withheld.
The reason given is that those named in the will could be at risk if they are publicly acknowledged to be associates of him. But that was the thing. But
I'm sure people might say as well, will we find out any financial information from it? So we may get a sense of other things that we don't know about Scappaticci. But you're right. He died at a point in time. I think he was 77 when he died. At a point in time when the Public Prosecution Service were considering volumes of material which had been gathered about Scappaticci by the Kenova investigative team. And I know that Kenova does not like it being said that this was a £47 million investigation which saw no one prosecuted, certainly in respect to the Stakeknife case. I know there's a prosecution in relation to another case they looked at, but it's not something which I think they initially liked being reminded of. But they would point out that they felt the evidence was there. But I think their biggest criticism is that a decision was not made while Scappaticci was alive. You can't prosecute a dead man, obviously, nor can you sue one. And it might be as well that's around a point in time, Scappaticci's death, where the media became probably a little bit more emboldened about saying Stakeknife was Freddie Scappaticci.
Yeah, because by the same token, a dead person can't sue.
Correct. Yeah. And I think whenever I first started reporting the Freddie Scappaticci Stakeknife story, and Freddie Scappaticci is Stakeknife, I think we were always couching it in careful terms. The man widely presumed to be, the man believed to be, and the early stories always included, for legal reasons, while he was alive, Scappaticci's denial. But over time, those have fallen away, and I think undoubtedly his death has contributed to the reporting now. But I think also that what is coming out in Kenova and what is being said in the background and in briefings and all the rest of it leaves people in no doubt whatsoever that Freddie Scappaticci was Stakeknife. And I think even if you look at the clues, the crumbs left in the latest Kenova report, it says Scappaticci told his wife, another woman, that he was Stakeknife, and you think to yourself, well, if that wasn't the case, then why is it mentioned in the report? Scappaticci was the first arrest of Operation Kenova. He was the man that featured in most files in Operation Kenova at the PPS. There is little doubt, but we are in a situation where Kenova cannot officially confirm Freddie Scappaticci as being Stakeknife. Bizarre as that may seem, Kevin Winters, the solicitor, says the dog's in the street. No, it's Scappaticci. Correct. John Boucher said if Scappaticci had have been a police agent as Stakeknife, he would be naming him. But in the circumstances which exist at the moment, because of the government wanting to protect a policy known as neither confirm nor deny, that's why we're in this territory.
But I think it's interesting that someone like Kevin Winters, the solicitor, can say, sure, the dog on the street knows that it's Freddie Scappaticci.
Yeah.
That may be as well, but actually for the BBC to then
Yeah.
say it with a sense of clarity and conviction. There's a different test there.
Well, yes, and I know that some BBC colleagues and other journalists have investigated the Stakeknife story to a much greater extent than I have, and a lot of their journalistic work makes them very, very confident that they can say this. I don't think no one has ever suggested to me there is one iota of doubt here. And I think also that Operation Kenova, publicly and privately, would rein journalists back from continually reporting this if it were not the case.
Let's just dig into that neither confirm nor deny policy, just because, people might hear that or read it and think, oh, well, that's okay then because, they have to protect their agents. But there are instances where they haven't gone and used that policy.
I think I'm right in saying that this NCND policy is a convention on practice rather than something which is set in law. I mean, I stand to be corrected on that. But essentially, it is a long-standing government convention that they will neither confirm nor deny someone's status as an agent in the interests of national security. However, in practice, in respect of the Northern Ireland Troubles, there have been occasions when agents have been officially, publicly identified. And I think Kenova pointed this out, and they set that against this case, where at this moment in time, Scappaticci will not be officially confirmed as Stakeknife because of government opposition, because of this policy. Now, I should say, in fairness to the government and Hilary Benn is saying that he's been asked by Kenova for permission to identify Stakeknife, and he wants to hear a Supreme Court ruling on a related case before making a final decision. But to come back to the point you make, Tara, there have been occasions previously where agents of the state have been confirmed and exposed with no consequence, and you set that against this case where a fundamental question, as far as families are concerned, has not been officially answered. I mean, I said on Newsline, we have had a near £50 million inquiry which hasn't answered one of the first fundamental questions: who was Stakeknife? What this is throwing up going forward, not only issues around what's disclosed to families and NCND, but also the role of MI5 in terms of the provision of information where relevant in legacy cases, because the picture that Kenova paints here is of an organisation which at times put up barriers and was unhelpful to Kenova. And what they're saying is that there needs to be a change in outlook from MI5 in respect to the Troubles to become much more cooperative in terms of disclosure and accountability.
I mean, Julian, there's a lot of eye-catching material in this report that people might kind of be surprised by or horrified by. What stood out for you?
Yeah, I mean, some of it reads like the stuff of a spy novel or a spooks television series. Kenova detectives at a point in time would have been embedded at Thames House, MI5 headquarters in London, so that it could access information around Stakeknife. They had their own safe, and through this report we learn that MI5 got the combination and were able to remove material from the safe.
Thanks to Julian for all of his expertise on that.
If you want to dial back, whether you're listening on Sounds or any other podcast platform, or indeed watching on YouTube.
Where?
Our last episode was about, it's extraordinary, the fact that there's so much cocaine now being taken in Northern Ireland, and ketamine and antidepressants, that traces of them are showing up in our waterways like Loch Ness and the Lagan, but as we learned as well, much further afield,
Loch Earn.
Loch Earn in County Fermanagh.
So we're back on Tuesday.
We are.
And the email, as always, thestateofus@bbc.co.uk.
Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.